Seated amongst the majestic Swiss Jura Mountains in the Loch, Switzerland, is the home of one of watchmaking's most storied names. Zenith Manufacture is not merely a workshop or production facility, but rather an empire of multiple structures of craftsmanship set on the hillside that upholds 160 years of know-how. In this video, we are given an exclusive tour by Roman Mazzilli of the brand to get a glimpse at the preserved artisanship that has allowed Zenith to be a revered name worldwide. So Roman, just to begin here, I think what's really important as you come to the Loch, you see Zenith for the first time, is to understand the structure of what is a campus. It's not just a building. The way that this was constructed was thinking about all the different necessities back 160 years ago. How could they construct around these grounds to make all things around watchmaking work? So could you give us an idea about how did this all come to be? What are the grounds that we're at right now?
Actually, it's a vision from our founder, Georges Favre-Jacot, that got inspired from the manufacturing principle coming actually from the US with Elgin Waltham. He relays on this interchangeable system, you know, and he sort of got the idea to reunite all the crafts that were spread here in the mountains for historical reason into these roofs to produce the best watches.
And one thing I think is important as well is we talk about an integrated manufacturer.
Yes.
But the structure of all these buildings serve a purpose. And like, what was the thought process around that? Like what is being done, and like we're on a hillside and everything is constructed in a very specific way.
Yeah. So we have to go back to this period. There was no electricity, okay? So the first, let's say, natural energy that you needed is the light. So all these buildings are facing southeast to welcome the best light.
The watchmakers need all the light so they're able to do the assembly and all the construction?
Absolutely. And actually the buildings has been built up the hill thanks also to the railway that was here that could welcome one of the main resources that we needed was the coil. The coal was alimenting the vacuum machine that we used to produce the cinematic energy at the time. We actually connected Le Loch, previous all other cities of the area, to the Swiss electrical networks, thanks to the activity of Zenith.
And another important point you brought up was, I mean, small town, we're talking about Le Loch, but 1,000 people of the 10,000 people that lived in this city at that time worked for Zenith.
Absolutely.
So commercially speaking, this helped build this region.
Completely. It was
and what happens here too, I think what's important to discuss is you're doing manufacturing of parts. You are T0 through T4, you are doing research and development, customer services, all being done on this campus with these different buildings and structures.
Yes. Yeah, this is, let's say, the chance we have. All this know-how, we have 60 different know-how in the manufacture, and we all are into the same site. So every specialist, every questions you have somebody to answer to. And this is what I really like about this manufacture. It's not only just the mechanical know-how, as you can see, it's also the patrimonial know-how. The heritage is so much important. If you put all our archives next to each other, it's 1 kilometer of paper. Can you imagine? And why? Because we always have been here in the same location. We are probably one of the only manufacturer that still is its own existing building from the beginning.
So I'm getting a sense so far that preservation of how you do things today is always looking back to the past. And I would imagine that's the case for customer service. Every aspect, what I've seen so far, has been all around this idea. So customer service, can you explain a little bit more what happens here? Yeah,
well, the chance to have kept all these parts allows us to repair almost everything that we've produced. So it's a kind of a responsibility and a mission for us to allow every customer that wants to have his even old pocket watch back from its original condition to be able to provide for this service. Have a look.
So you're retaining a lot of these smaller parts from your archives, you have them, you inventory them, so if somebody has a request, they have a specific model, serial number, you'd be able to identify what part you might need, maybe there's a specific function that needs to be taken care of.
Absolutely.
You have all this documented.
Absolutely. What our founder really believed in with this interchangeable principle is that by putting a serial number on the movement and then of course a reference of the watch, you could trace also for quality purposes, you know, you could trace every single watch. And this, of course, 160 years down the track is for us fantastic because it allows really to get extract of origins of each part and certificate also for every customer. And if he wants to get it repaired, we also have some parts, even look, for the pocket watches still available, but they are not also under financial control, because these are all bits and pieces that we kept because we had the chance to never move from this original area.
It seems like you have inventory for most of the parts that I could imagine, but I would assume there are also times where maybe someone has something very specific that they need for repairing and restoring their watch. Do you also have the capacity to create parts that were historically shown in watches, or do you have the plans that can do that?
Totally. We've got the plans that are linked to, of course, the serial numbers, and we still have some of the tools because, you know, we're gonna end up the visit with the specific attic area, you know, and in the attic you will see a lot of old tools that were used before to produce the parts. So we can always get inspired from how they were producing the parts. Of course, the tools that are stored in the attic cannot be used with the original press that we have now, but it's a way for us to, if we need to reproduce, how we're going to be able to do it thanks to the expertise of the past.
And even contemporary watches, if they have their service needs, it needs to come back to the manufacturer, that's also done in the same facility.
Here we have all the contemporary, watches that are repaired. Again, we talk about almost 80% on a chronograph, you know, which is the El Primero. But you have to understand that 50% of the repairs that are done here are from watches before the 60s.
Oh, so this is mostly vintage that's happening.
Completely, because Switzerland takes care of different markets, such as Germany, Italy, and its own market, Switzerland and France, but also takes care of all the vintage that cannot be repaired in the authorized service centers, and also all the high-end watches that have to come back here. So we are in the mechanical department. It's a key department here because it's the service department. This is where we're going to produce all the tools that the guys will use in the different, let's say, workshop benches to only assemble the different parts, but also what we're going to use for the customer service in terms of assembling the hands or casing the different cases and parts. It's produced internally. But there's also one technique that we master, is the art of stamping the parts. When it comes to increase the production, after 3,000 more or less watches that have been produced traditionally with the machines we've seen downstairs, here comes the time where we're gonna use the stamping tool to actually cut the parts. So you have to imagine that you have a blade of material going through a press, 15-ton press, and you have a stamp with 2 positive and negative parts inside that will cut up to 3 components per second. And of course, for interchangeable reason, this is the best technique to master the dimension.
So you're taking these raw materials, being able to cut these small, these are components for the actual movements, and these also tools that you're using to assemble movements as well that's being created here.
Also tools that are created here, but the stamps, let's say, are used only for the components.
Components, okay.
Yes.
And every watch will have specific component requirements that can all be done here.
Completely.
You have different materials, I see, so these blanks, and then you can...
Absolutely. We mainly use steel, copper beryllium and brass roller. You know, we use the best steel in watchmaking. You know, it's the magenta steel, which is, let's say, the most expensive steel. But since we don't have that many kilos in the watch, this is why we use it. But also, we use this technique to really allow to increase the production and to keep our own know-how. A stamping tool is a lot of money, close to 50,000 Swiss francs. It's 300 hours of work, but it has a lifetime living. You know.
Are there any specific components that, because normally if you look at this type of step in the manufacturing process, this is outsourced by many brands. This is not something they're doing in-house. Are there particular components that you're especially proud of that you're doing in this facility?
Completely. We have now included into this stamping a progressive stamping, it's called, meaning that we not just cut parts, but we also include bending and recesses, okay? So it's a kind of work on a chain into the stamps, and we are quite proud of this because it allows to get the component out perfectly done and usable. Not gonna put a thermal treatment on this component to allow its shape to be hardened a little bit and to keep its internal material a bit soft. But again, this is something that it belongs to us because it's the shape of our components and the tools that we design for our components. If we subcontract that, we have it like a subscription. Stamps never belong to us. This is why we keep this knowledge inside.
And when you were talking about the origins of this manufacture back in the mid-1800s, the whole concept and premise behind constructing these facilities is to create. The French term for it, what was it?
Établisseur, yes.
Établisseur. So that's basically the antithesis of this idea of trying to have all these different parts brought in. Is to really be able to do this in-house was the premise here.
Completely. And on some very hard materials, such as the steel, we're going to cut every component that has a few tenths of a millimeter up to 1 millimeter. So it includes 40% of the components into the watch. So imagine that we want to produce this component, okay? So the role of this department is, upon this drawing, is to create a stamp. The stamp will be able to cut up to 3 components per second, and the goal is, of course, to find, both on the positive and on the negative, the same shape of the component you want to cut. Imagine this is placed into a press, 15 ton, and you have blades of material that will go through step by step. So I'm going to simulate that. Imagine this is the blade of steel. I will come here, do the pressing, and of course you will get inside the component that is automatically extracted, as you can see. You have this that goes back to the melting process, of course.
So that you repurpose that material so it's not wasted?
It's going to be refounded and relaminated, okay? And this will continue its journey. And you have to imagine 3 times per second, you have a blowing system that gets the component out of the way.
And you're creating all of these, are you creating these molds too? You have to create all these?
Totally, we have electro-erosion downstairs that will cut these components that are made out of carbonium tungsten. So you need to use electro-erosion.
Very hard material.
Yes. Absolutely. And they are both adjusted, male and female, positive and negative, with 2 micron adjustments. So we are in the prototype department, completely linked, of course, with the constructor. Here you are able to produce a few amount of parts to continue and validate the shape, for example, of the component through this prototype, let's say, gesture, okay? But you're going to produce also all the limited edition or all the high-end parts. We also, thanks to the electro-erosion, are going to be able to produce this famous matrice and poinçon, so positive and negative tools that we have seen for the stamping. So we're going to use carbonium tungsten material, very hard material, so this is why we're going to use electricity to cut it, because the electricity allows to cut hard material without creating any, let's say, burr or any dilatation of the material. Okay.
And then for the prototyping, I mean, you're looking at movement construction, like developing like the base plate. Do you start with the movements first, and when you're thinking about a prototype, is it always inside out because that's going to dictate the design?
Completely. We have both. We have to welcome the design with functionalities, okay? But we always come with a frame. The frame is the dimension itself of the movement. So the main plate, as you said it well, is the base chassis of the watch, and can be done, of course, here, again, into these limited quantities to validate the measurements. Every part is welcome with a drawing. Every drawing has its tolerances. We have machines that are precise up to 1 micron. Therefore, thanks to this level of precision, we're going to set these tolerances and set the drawing being the passport of the component.
So this is where you can utilize CNC to be able to develop some of these prototypes, and then at that point, once you recognize that this is viable, when you go to scale, that's where we start to see the pressing technique come into play for some of these smaller components.
Perfectly right.
When you get to this scale of watchmaking, I think it's underestimated how much time it takes to develop a product at scale. So what is the life cycle of the production process looking like when you're starting with a prototype to completed actual viable product?
Oh, it takes years sometimes, especially if you start from scratch, you know. It takes only just 10,000 hours to place these 320 parts into this dimension on just a 3D software.
Wow.
You know. Then, if you want to produce all the components that have been validated, it takes between 8 to 9 months, a little bit like a baby to be born, you know, just to have everything in stock before you only start to assemble the watch.
Wow.
So we are at the decoration here department where we master, let's say, every finishing, of course. The goal is to keep this know-how here and to have specialists that can always bring also maybe new ideas. This is something that we will reveal with the 135 and that will show the crafts that we can bring as a unique way of decorating. But the art of decoration, as you know, is try to enhance the beauty, the relief maybe sometimes of the shape of the parts. This is most likely when we talk about this satin finish with the angle polished. This is really to enhance the relief. So it's part of, let's say, the know-how that most of the maison brings now, because we have the open back cases with the crystal, and every customer can sort of admire the work that it's been done on the movement.
So types of finishing you'll see here, you'll have perlage, you'll have beveling of bridges and other components. What else is being finished? And how does the technicians that are doing this, because this is a very specific skill, not just any watchmaker is just coming in here and being able to do this. This is professionals that are absolutely perfected this art.
Completely.
And they're always cycling through different finishing techniques. Is that true?
Yes, totally. We try to have a polyvalence, you know, in terms of the know-how. So when you start to come here as a young and you want to learn, you start maybe with the spotting, which is one of the easiest and one of the main known. And then you go to the anglage and to a different kind of a finishing, more and more complicated. The goal is to master the excellence. So the time and the quantities are not, let's say, the goal at the beginning, but really the quality. And this is how you can also justify the price, of course, on the watch, because sometimes you're going to spend 2-3 hours on a component that took a few minutes just to produce.
So we see someone beveling an edge of a bridge here. Could you explain exactly, for those that are not familiar, what is happening here and what is this artisan doing?
Yeah. So before you get to the kind of polish, mirror polish finishing, you need to remove all the stripes, you know, with different abrasive. So the goal will be to remove, let's say, the stripes made by the machine, with a kind of abrasive that will remove the scratches, but then the next abrasive will remove the scratch from the previous one, you know? So it's a kind of a scale work that has to be repeated in a way that then all the surface is almost really, really blank. And then only with a diamond powder and with the gentian wood that has the perfect, let's say, hardening to do this, you're gonna bring the light up and then the mirror effect. All right, so here we are in the assembling departments, you know, from T0 to T3. And of course, with the organization we have specialists that are working on the organs of the watch. This allows the guys to work on different calibers within the same week or month. Okay.
What's different here, what I'm noticing, because I've been to a lot of manufacturers, seeing assembly, is you have all aspects of assembly on one floor. Why is that?
Well, for better communication, transversal communication, very important, and for cleanliness purposes. You know, one of the enemies is the particles that we carry ourselves. So the goal is to avoid all this. And there are controls, of course, every step before we do the final regulation of chronograph, for example, penetrations here, okay, before we transfer to the T2 for the final assembly of the watch. So communication is key because our organization relies on specialists. Specialists have a certain level of responsibility. They are not just operators, and you have guys then pick up the problematic movements. They are the ones that assemble that are responsible for what they've done. And this is why it works quite well, because even if at the end of the assembly you may find a trace or something that has been done before, everybody knows whom and why and when it has been done.
So each stage is cross-checking the previous work so that there's no mistakes down the line. So you're starting with
know-how.
You're starting with components down there, so you're comparing them all in kits. T0, then T1, you'll have assembly, T2, casing, and then T3, getting the product ready to go.
Bracelets,
and yes.
Exactly. T4 is delivery controls, final controls, and delivery.
So all down the line, and makes a lot of sense. And then also just the visibility, when you're talking about the structure of this manufacturer, you walk in here and you have all this beautiful natural light, easy for the watchmakers to be able to manage these small parts, because an average one of, even El Primero alone, it's over 300 components.
Yeah, 321 for the watch you're wearing. Of course, everyone has been checked, everyone has been packaged, cleaned, and everyone is going to be pre-assembled and assembled. So for sure, you need the best light, and for sure, you need also the specialist that tells you, okay, this one is, rather than the one week before, is slightly a little bit different. It's a real expertise. When you work into this dimension, we talk about thousands of millimeters, you get your eye that gets accustomed on things that maybe even the machines may not notice. T0, you know, guys, is mainly the fitting of the jewels, which we have machines that will fit them at the correct heights with the correct force. This really simplifies then the assembling, where you're gonna have to adjust then the handshakes between all the wheels. So this is why it's a nice communication. The first few movements that are assembled, if there are some adjustments, you straight away directly for the series manage the machine to bring back the right tolerances upon the reality, okay? This is machines, and they can work even at night. But when it comes to very specific parts, such as this clutch for the 3600, we need again specialists that allows, with their know-how, to bring the jewel at the correct height with a very soft material here. This is why we use the human touch and not the machine, because the development of tools and supports will be too expensive, and this is why it relies on the people.
Still relies on the technician to this day.
Of course.
So just so those following along understand, so this is where you'll get some of these small components in these kits so that for a specific movement for the next technician, they're prepared. You'll do jewel setting. Lubrication as well will be done at this stage for some of the pivots?
Some, not all of them, but you see on the different workbenches some of the lubricants that brings the perfect oil at the perfect quantity in the perfect spot. What is interesting with the jewels, and maybe you know that, is that the jewels are prepared by assortments. Their dimension is within a certain tolerance. So you have a tolerance plus and minus. So of course, the jewels that are on the plus tolerance will be linked to the hole that are on the minus tolerance. And this is a know-how. Never assume that you get a packet of jewels, you put it in here and you fit it. Never. You will observe the jewels and you will, in the packet, spread the tolerance up and the tolerance low to then allocate the correct holes for this jewels.
Fascinating.
And this is a know-how. So every pallet, entry and exit, allows to get the impulse to the balance wheel, right? The impulse must be the same. So the penetration, meaning the depth of the teeth going into these pallets, must be homogeneously, let's say, even onto the wheels of the escapement. Particularity, of course, of the El Primero is that you have 20 teeth on the escapement, because it's a 5 Hertz, right? So you need 20 times on each side, have more or less the same value. This gives you the regularity of your tick and your tack. So, in the T2 department, after the movement have been assembled and checked, of course, the responsibility is the aesthetic, let's say. You have to fit the dial and the hands, and then case the watch. Of course, we do this under laminar flow that avoids the dust to come in. It's one of the most important parts because aesthetically, these guys are responsible really to have the product until the end perfect without any dust inside, of course. All right. What I'm going to show you is something quite specific at Zenith when it comes to this doomed crystal that we have in some of our revival, because we welcome also the chrono hand to respect the doom of the crystal. And this is done by hand by a specialist. That means every single watch is almost unique.
After our long day of navigating the winding hallways of the Zenith watchmaking campus, we conclude with a stop in a space with dust and cobwebs lining its walls, with only dim lighting and Roman being our guide. Despite the decrepit look of this attic, it serves as a reminder of the defiance of one unrelenting man, who stood up to those who called for the destruction of a legend, and is the very grounds that ultimately saved the Zenith brand.
But it's to highlight how much, again, this El Primero was iconic. I think I told you a few times that this is the only time in the industry that this movement has been made. So it's a witness of an era. Before the El Primero, every movement was not made like it has been made in such an industrial way. And just after, there was this quartz crisis. What happens? We want to bring the first automatic chronograph in the industry, on top of the fact that it's 5 Hertz, and we presented in January 69. Actually, 10th of January, the movement, and April, the watches. Famous 83, 86, 84 that you know very well. But it's already a crisis. In 68, we have a holding done with the Movado to try to save the furniture. And we have no other choice, and this is the bankers that owns us in 69, to sell this company to the less worth actors at the period. And these guys are Americans from Chicago. Their name is Zenith Radio Corporation. You may know this brand. They're famous for the cameras and TV screens and everything. They're specialists of the electronic entertainment. And they believe, because they have the same name as the Swiss watchmakers, they're gonna do the best quartz watches. Unfortunately, they don't get along really well with the watchmakers from the mountains. And 4 years down the track, we are in 1971 when they purchased the brand. 4 years down the track, they sell it back to a Swiss man here, Mr. Castella, that owns Dixie Polytool. But before that, they give the order to throw all the tools, and mostly all the tools that were used to produce the El Primero. You totally understood what is a stamp. Here we have a good example. You know how much it costs. Let's say an average of 40,000. We needed 147 to produce the El Primero at the time. That means 6 million investment worth, boom, in the garbage. So we have this man, Charles Vermont. He stood against that because he was so familiar with this movement. He knew that there was just once in a lifetime that this would have been produced this way, that he didn't want this to disappear. So he writes a letter that he gives to the board, explaining that fashion is as it is, that it always have back and forwards. He asks the board to take care of this and to put everything into one room to allow this maybe in one day to be reproduced. His wish is that this movement is reproduced again. He doesn't get any answer. So, with the fear, he asks his brother to help him, and within 9 months, without saying anything to anybody except his colleagues, saying, the Americans, they asked me to do a few things, I have to stay later, blah, blah, blah. But he didn't say anything to his wife and son. He goes and collects and comes to the attic and puts this in the attic, but not just randomly into one space and writes El Primero, because he's so afraid that these guys come and steal it, that he placed some of the important stamps amongst other ones. And he traced or saw into the attic, a kind of a way that the mechanicians would most possibly record and refine this in case he dies, right? He does all that, and he goes to retirement. 10 years after that, 1984, there's an engineer here, Mr. Jean-Pierre Gerber, that hears about Rolex. Rolex wants to put for the first time on their Daytona an automatic chronograph. Rolex asks the Swiss market, who is capable of producing this movement? Mr. Gerber calls back Mr. Vermont and asks, is it true? I heard you may have done something, because there was a kind of a rumor Do you think we're going to be able to reproduce this movement? And Charles Vermont says, yes, we have everything. We can reproduce. That same day, actually, he gathers his family again and he explains what he has done 10 years before that. In 1984, we go to the attic, we get back the tools, we have so much chance, and we have also so much sympathy with this, let's say, El Primero, that even the press that we lent to other actors are brought back to redo the El Primero. And we start to reproduce a line of movements for Rolex without the 5 Hertz, because they wanted to keep the customer service. 5 Hertz is almost like our signature, you know? So they put it on the 4 Hertz and without the calendar also. So what I would like you to really perceive is this attic. For me, the attic is a kind of a place that still has stories to tell, because you will find also old stamps and old tools from previous calibers and even from the 135 that you've visited. And this always gets an inspiration for us. Of course, you will not be able to use these stamps that we will see in the attic, but it's still a part of the patrimony. You will see how many there are. This value of this area is, you cannot estimate the value of this, but really it's the emotional value that we try to bring, because we have the chance to listen to Charles, that has been interviewed in 1991 by the Swiss television, right in the attic.
Alors là, quand M. Gerber est venu vers moi me demander si on pouvait ensemble retrouver, ressortir tous les outillages et voir la possibilité de remettre en route, alors j'ai dit alors avec plaisir.
Vous étiez heureux?
Alors oui, là j'étais son... Oui, là j'étais son homme.
C'était votre rêve qui se réalisait?
Tout à fait.